Welcome to training number 7, self-compassion. This is where I'd normally share a quote from some famous person, but I thought today I'd just share my own personal story because I really believe that self-compassion is one of the most powerful tools in this entire training. And my story is about, always striving for perfection. As an engineer, I was always trying to be smarter and work harder and never get any mistakes. I got a lot of my self-esteem from trying to be smarter than other people. I would compare my grade to the person next to me. And then in my life, I would try and show off that I was an engineer to show him how smart I was. And then even as a coach, I was trying to be perfect all of the time. I was trying to be perfect so that I could be a perfect example for other people as a coach. But the reality was I made lots of mistakes. I made lots of failures and mistakes along the way. And I was human. I was imperfect. And the result of this is always trying to be perfect, but never getting there, never being perfect, always making mistakes, but trying and pushing myself all the time to be perfect and never make mistakes just resulted in a lot of stress. I was stressed out. I was less productive at work because that stress would just wear me down. And then eventually I just get burned out and sometimes just crash for a couple days and lay in bed for a couple days and waste so much time and energy through this self-inflicted stress. And once I found self-compassion, once I started to show myself compassion for my mistakes, whenever I did fail, whenever I did have a setback, being kind to myself in those moments allowed me to work through them in a less stressful way. Rather than beating myself up or feeling like a failure and putting myself down in those moments, I compassionately grew myself past that mistakes, learned from them, went beyond them, and that relieves so much stress in my life. And I'm so much more at ease when I make mistakes, and I'm so much more ease at moving through those mistakes and moving beyond failures that the stress doesn't wear me down as much. I have so much more energy now to actually be more productive. And that's one of the things I'm going to be putting forward in this. We're going to talk about the scientific research that supports that. But because I wasn't worn down as much from the stress and being compassionate with myself, I was able to be more productive. A lot of times we feel like we need to be critical and harsh with ourselves in order to grow and become better. But sometimes being critical and harsh with ourselves actually just leads to procrastination and rumination, which holds us back in the long run. And by being compassionate with ourselves, we're able to move past mistakes quicker and faster and be more productive in the long run. And before we start today, I want you to think of a time recently when you were in a difficult situation, you had a failure, a setback, or you just noticed something that you didn't like about yourself, some insecurity or something that you were judging yourself for. And think of a relatively simple situation just for practice today, because this is a skill. This is something you can build up over time. So don't pick anything too complicated or too difficult to process at this moment, but just something, a small failure. We all have them every day, little failures that we have along the way. So pick something recently where you just had a minor setback and you're dealing with something difficult. And go ahead and pause the video and write that down now so that you have that in mind as you're going through this and we're practicing the exercises. So go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Great, welcome back. So just an outline for today, we're going to talk about why self-compassion is important, why it's important for those difficult moments, and some of the scientific research behind that. And then we'll talk about the 3 components of self-compassion, and then we're going to practice self-compassion with a meditation that's going to address all 3 components of self-compassion. But first, we're going to talk about why self-compassion is important. And first, specifically, we're going to talk about why it's important versus self-esteem in difficult moments. So self-esteem is a really great thing. It can be really positive, and it can have a lot of positive benefits to your well-being, your self-confidence, your ability to take action, but it's often can lead to some negative things in difficult moments. In moments of failure, in moments of setbacks, in difficult moments when we notice something we don't like about ourselves, suddenly our self-esteem is questioned. And in those moments that our self-esteem is questioned, it can lead to really some negative things, because our self-esteem is often based on success. It's often based on being successful, being above average, being really unique, having special talents. And that's why I put the Olympic gold medal there as a symbol for self-esteem, because it often depends on being above average, being recognized, being successful, being somewhat better than other people. And that's one of the main drawbacks, is it depends on being that success. And when we don't have that success, self-esteem can often just leave. It can just leave, go out the window, and all of that self-esteem we built up is suddenly gone in moments of failure. And that's when we go to self-criticism. That's when we start judging ourselves, putting ourselves down, and wearing ourselves down in those difficult moments. And in those difficult moments, sometimes if we try to focus on self-esteem, it can lead to some negative things. That's when sometimes when somebody's dealing something difficult and they try to build their self-esteem in those moments, they sometimes go to narcissism, where they just ignore their faults, they ignore their failures and don't really deal with them. Or they try to put others down in order to feel better about themselves. You know, they've had a failure, so they just compare themselves to somebody that's doing worse than them. Or that can even lead to bullying, where they try to put somebody else down to feel better about themselves. So self-esteem is not very effective at dealing with failure. It's good at helping us believe in ourselves in positive moments, look for successes and move forward and build ourselves up. But in those moments of failure and setbacks, self-esteem isn't the whole picture. It's not everything that you need in those difficult moments. And that's where self-compassion steps in. When you have those moments of failure, difficult moments, when you're feeling bad about yourself, that's when self-compassion can help you get through those difficult times. Rather than trying to look for how you're different or special or better, it asks, how am I the same? How am I just another human being that's dealing with failure, just like every other human being, dealing with my own imperfect humanity? How am I just a human being that has difficult emotions and has difficult times, just like every other human being? And that is what connects us. It helps us feel like we can move forward. It helps us feel like there's nothing wrong with us in those moments, that we have the ability to change. And it helps us move past those failures and be more resilient in the long run. And now I want you to pause the video and think of that situation that you thought of at the beginning, that difficult time you had recently, or that setback or failure, or just when you noticed something you didn't like about yourself, you were judging yourself. And think about that moment and how it would be different if you dealt with it with self-esteem versus self-compassion. So notice how dealing with that difficult moment with self-esteem would be different than dealing with it with self-compassion, and what the benefit would be of using self-compassion in that moment instead of self-esteem, where you're trying to boost your ego rather than being compassionate and learning from it and moving forward. So go ahead and pause the video and think about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion for just a few seconds, and write down whatever your thoughts are. Great, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about the difference between self-compassion and self-criticism. And with this, I want you to think of a situation. A father has a son who comes home with a failing grade, and the father says to the son, "You idiot, I can't believe you failed. What am I going to do with you? I don't know how you're going to pass this class. You're just terrible at school. I don't know how you're going to get through this." And think about the impact that would have on that child. I know a lot of us had critical parents, and we had to rebel against them to fight for our own self-esteem and to be moved beyond their criticism. But I want you to imagine if the child really started to believe this, if those words became a reality, a truth for this child, if he really started to believe that he was a loser, what impact would that have on the child? So go ahead and just pause the video for a second and think about the negative effects that would have down the road if that child really started to believe it was a loser and criticize itself the same way that that critical parent did to him in that moment. So go ahead and pause the video and think about that now. Great, welcome back. Now I want you to think of another situation, the opposite situation, the compassionate situation. The father again is there and his son comes home with a failing grade, but instead of being critical, the father says, "Ah, man, that's really tough. I know how much it hurts to fail, but I want you to know that we all fail sometimes. And the important thing is to get back up and to work for it. And I want you to know that I'm here to support you and I love you. We all fail, and you failing doesn't take away from my love for you. And I want you to know that. And I'm here to support you. What do you need?" What do you think would happen to the child with that message? So go ahead and pause the video and again think about the long-term effects if the child really believed that message, really believed that the father was there to support him and love him no matter what. What would be the long-term effects of that? So go ahead and pause the video and think about that now. Maybe write down some notes for yourself. So go ahead and do that now. Great, welcome back. And again, this is just a metaphor for our relationship with ourselves. Again, you may have had a critical parent or a supportive parent and you found ways to overcome either one. If they were critical of you, you may have found ways to overcome that criticism. But this is about our relationship with ourselves. So how do we treat ourselves? If we're telling ourselves that we're a loser and we're just destined for failure, that's what's going to happen. We're going to not believe in ourselves enough to actually change. And if we are compassionate with ourselves and we are caring and supportive of ourselves, it creates an environment where you start to believe that you can change and that it's okay to fail, that it's just part of life to fail. So that's the difference, one of the main differences between compassion and criticism and how it affects ourselves when we're talking to ourselves. So again, it's just a metaphor for how we treat ourselves. And even though most of us know that these really harsh words don't help, don't actually encourage change, they just depress change and lead to negative emotions that hold us back even more, a lot of us are still very harsh and critical to ourselves. And we say things, the reason I was so harsh with that is that probably isn't something that a parent would actually say. Most parents wouldn't actually say, but that's sometimes how we talk to ourselves. We sometimes call ourselves names, we're critical of ourselves, we put ourselves down really harshly. And ways that we'd never be harsh to a friend or even to someone we didn't like. So why do we do this? Why are we so harsh with ourselves, even though we know that it's not very effective at motivating change? Well, I think one of the main reasons is that we believe if we're too kind to ourselves, if we're too compassionate, and we aren't critical and judging of ourselves, we're going to become complacent. We're going to become lazy, and we're not going to get anything done. But in fact, the scientific research shows that the exact opposite is true. These are just two studies. This first one, self-compassion increases self-improvement motivation. It was published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, showed that self-compassion was more effective than self-esteem at motivation for change. And the second study, self-criticism, goal motivation, and goal progress from Dartmouth, from University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, showed that self-criticism reduced progress towards goals because it leads to that rumination, leads to procrastination. Self-criticism leads to burnout, so it reduces our effectiveness in life. Thank you for watching this clip from our emotional intelligence training. The training is designed to help you improve your self-confidence, your stress management, and your conflict resolution skills. If you'd like to gain access to this full training video for free, you can click the link below.